to the astrology interview. And this time I'm so thrilled to be talking with Penny Thornton. Now, Penny, you have been an astrologer since time began. Back in 1977, I think, was that when you first started?
I'm trying to remember. No, that's when I got my diploma with the faculty. So it actually started quite a bit before then, not too long before then. And my interest in astrology was way before then.
So what happened for you? Were you, as a child, were you fascinated by the planets or the skies or the heavens? What happened for you?
Well, I think I was just rather interested in the concept of astrology. And I got Louis MacNeice's book, Astrology, which was quite advanced for a sort of 15-year-old, who's because a lot of sun sign, well, not a lot, but sun sign astrology was mainly where you got the idea, oh, astrology is interesting. But I also found out later in life, once my grandmother had died, that she was a theosophist. So she'd had a lot of interest in life after death and working with the theosophical movement. But because my mother was so freaked out about anything like this, she never told me. We never had a discussion about it. But I think how wonderful if my grandmother had been able to talk to me about her experiences, what she knew, how interesting that would be.
Do you ever feel her around you, sort of having conversations with you?
Not really, but I do. When I think back to my childhood, I do think about my time spent with that grandmother as being particularly special because she was a great cook. And as you know, I think I'm a good cook, but I've certainly written a book on cooking and headed a television program about cooking with astrology. So, and I feel that is also something, a resonance that I have with her.
So when did you think I want to turn this into my career?
Well, there were a couple of stages. When I was a student with the Royal Ballet, and I was living in a flat, rather poncy flat in Knightsbridge with three other girls. One of those girls had had her chart done by Ingrid Lind. And I read that. I thought it was absolutely wonderful. And I remember saying to her, do you think she'd do my chart? And she said, well, why don't you ask her? So I remember writing to Ingrid and asking if would she kindly do my chart? And so, yes, of course, she agreed to. And when I received it, had a little note at the bottom, handwritten, because in those days we all wrote, our interpretations.
All done by hand.
Typed them out. But she had written a little hand note saying, I really love Aries. My daughter Tinks is an Aries. Anytime you're passing, come and see me. Well, that was red rag to a bull the other way around. It was like, and I came up the very next Saturday. I was on the bus up to Oxfordshire. Wow. And so really it was Ingrid, I think, who was the president of the faculty.
See, and that
which was interesting. Well, it was really her influence with the time I spent with her, which was covered a lot of things. Ingrid was part of the White Eagle Lodge, and she and her husband, Sir Ronald, and various other notables had worked all the way through the war on what she would say, on the inner planes we worked. And I was sort of very swept up in this world of inner planes, really, because she was a very spiritual and very psychic person, although also having a terrific brain and, of course, being quite a well-known astrologer. She wrote for a column for She magazine, as well as being part of the faculty. So I find that all quite interesting, that it was Ingrid who was my mentor, and I followed the same route.
You followed the same route as her. But also, I think Churchill, it's known that he did use psychics, mystics, and I think astrologers during the war. Is that true?
Well, I don't know about that. And Ingrid certainly never talked about that. She just talked about their working in an altered state, really, sort of like espionage, I suppose you might say.
Yes.
Remote viewing.
Yes.
So I found that very fascinating. I still do.
And that's still going on all over the place, remote viewing.
Yeah. And, the more I think about it now, and I think about my grandmother, then I think about Ingrid and the resonances with my life and theirs. I mean, obviously, I went through the faculty, was part and parcel of the Astrological Association, was the secretary to the association. And there was a point when Charles Harvey and Julia, who was, then the president of the faculty, both came to me and asked me if I would, be the president of the faculty. Wow. And I thought about it long and hard and thought, I'm not sure this is going to work for me. I have two young children. And then they had the idea of, instead of handing the mantle over, what they would do would have a sort of election. So they said, we're going to put Lindsay Rademacher and you up for election. And I think that was when I thought, Lindsay would make a much better president than I would. So I just completely backed out. But I thought that was interesting because that's what Ingrid had done.
Yes. And so that's what, then you started as a professional astrologer.
Well, no, sorry, that was some time hence. I mean, when I went to the faculty, that would have been about 1975, 76. We had outside classes. We met in London every week, and Zach Matthews was my tutor, along with everyone else. There was a whole class of us. Although originally I'd reached out to Roger Elliott because I rather enjoyed his writing and I wanted to do that course, but it had already begun, so I didn't do that one. And then when I was just about to give birth, I took the diploma of the faculty. It was 1977. I remember having great difficulty writing everything my desk. Yes, and the baby arrived, and the notification from the faculty that I'd got the diploma. They were the two things at the same time.
It's a big moment, isn't it?
Very big.
I'm much further, on the other end of the line than you are. You doing it so early, but it's a great moment.
It was a great moment. Yes, it was.
Yeah, it's a real. So is that when you started writing books, or?
Well, again, this was almost by accident, in that one of my great friends, nothing to do with astrology, nothing to do with ballet, nothing like that. Her husband was the owner of Fulsham's, which published Old Moore's Almanac. And I had made some comments about her little boy, Trent, which she then talked to her husband about, Barry Belasco, and said, this is what Penny said. And he said, oh, that's interesting. Maybe we should ask Penny if she'd do some personality reviews for Old Moore's Almanac. So that was the first thing I did. And I used to say that my first paycheck came via Princess Margaret because she was the first person I did.
Well, you had quite a relationship with the royal family.
I have the Royal Ballet.
The Royal Ballet and the Royal Family.
Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Is that in your chart, Penny?
Well, I don't know. I've got my ascendant is Spica. And Jupiter is on my ascendant. So I've got a Jupiter Spica conjunction on my ascendant. And I remember when Diana came into being, so to speak, we all knew that Charles was dating Lady Diana Spencer. We had her chart. And I saw that my ascendant-descendant axis was her MCIC axis, because at that time we were working with a 7:30 birth time. But then when the birth time was changed to 2 p.m, my ascendant became her ascendant.
Oh. So did that change your relationship, or had you already kind of really established what was going on between you?
You mean when I discovered, or she told me that she was born at 2 p.m? But no, it didn't. That was, let's see, it was about 2 years into our relationship, I think.
Oh, okay.
And she saw I had her chart and other charts on the table between us. And so, we'd already met, we'd already had a lot of discussion about this and that with the astrology. And then she was looking at what I had written. She said, so what is this? And I said, and it was the details of your birth, date, time, place. So I said, that's the time of birth. And she said, yeah, but I wasn't born at 7:45 in the evening. I was born just before Wimbledon. It was in the afternoon. And I said, oh, really? And that was so interesting because, of course, I could tell anybody that the wrong chart was being used at that time. So that had to be kept quiet for years, really.
Right. Now, it raises an interesting question, doesn't it? Because I know you got quite a lot of flack, didn't you, for
You could call it that.
for disclosing the fact that you had been her astrologer. What was that like for you, Penny?
I didn't disclose the fact that I was her astrologer. I was working in Fleet Street. I was Today newspaper's astrologer. I wrote a daily column on astrology. I was under contract to News International and Rupert Murdoch. I was a sitting duck. I'd signed a contract to them. So when Andrew Morton's book came out, or rather the page proofs, before the actual book, hit the newsstands, it was starting to be, well, people knew they were on the ski slopes of Closters. And I remember my agent at the time coming back to me and saying, Penny, you're not going to believe this, but Andrew Morton's written a book and he has named you as Diana's astrologer in that book. Well, of course, Today newspaper were over the moon. I mean, how fantastic. Here in this newspaper, they had the Royal Astrologer, or so that's what they wanted to put out. Diana's astrologer is our astrologer. You have no control over that. You have given up your life to News International, and you either break your contract and leave, but it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't give you a lot of room to maneuver. So I refused point blank to give any interview whatsoever to Today newspaper. But they're very clever. They have a huge stable of newspapers in News International. So what would happen is, I remember the first time it happened was the Express produced an article about me, and it looked as though they'd had an interview with me. But what they'd done was take my book, Synastry, in which I talked about Diana and Charles's chart, the likelihood of divorce, everything. But they made it look, everything I said, they put in inverted commas, but they made it seem as though I had talked to them. And I kept I kept stepping on landmines where I was completely set up to sound as though I had given information that was private and confidential, but I just blabbed it out. And even when there was the one very important article that came out in the Star, I think it was, The People, something like that, I can't remember now, by Tina somebody, which actually disclosed verbatim the last conversation I had with Diana, as if I would have rung up anyone and given that. But yeah, I mean, these things kept happening. And now we know a lot more about phone tapping. And that certainly was something that was happening to me, but that all came out a lot later. So,
but Penny, what was it like for you to sort of be on that receiving edge of it must have been, I can only imagine, incredibly uncomfortable.
It was absolutely horrible. And I'll give you another incident that was absolutely horrible. I was rung up on a Saturday morning by the News of the World. And of course, everybody knew me by that time, and everybody knew I worked for Today, and they're all a big family. And this woman, terribly sweet, she just said to me, we're doing a weekend piece on what our favorite people are doing over the weekend. So what are you doing this weekend, Penny? So I told her what I was doing over the weekend. She said, that's just lovely. Thank you so much. Well, when I woke up on Sunday morning, I was front page of the News of the World.
Wow.
And it said, I will take Diana to court. What?
Gosh.
I mean, honestly, dirty tricks. And we've got Harry and,
Yeah.
you know, yes, it was a minefield. And I don't think anyone in the faculty or at the time really knew what was going on and had no idea of the pressures. I got letters written to me by colleagues condemning me. It was very unpleasant, asking where my integrity was. And I'm thinking, just a minute. I'm in the center of this storm with very little maneuverability. I'm just doing my best. And of course, under contract with Today, I was contracted to write articles. So I would write an article, but I did my level best to be objective and not to insert anything that could be privileged information. So I did quite a dance, really, for a couple of years.
Yeah, a ballet dancer on the stage and a dancer amongst we all know what the newspapers can be like.
Well, we do now, but we didn't know at the time.
Yeah, yeah. I think for me, it's I've been thinking about this a lot, about the moral dilemma of actually using public people's charts to discuss them in public. I think it's one thing to do it perhaps in a training situation, but there's a lot of people now, particularly on YouTube, that are looking at people's charts and they're alive. And how do you feel about that, Penny?
Well, I mean, it is definitely a point of concern. And I often say, and I think I've become quite adept at doing it now when I write or when I'm speaking, to sort of use metaphors around things that you want to say about a particular chart, because I wouldn't like to find out on YouTube or by some other means that somebody thought I was going to die, on the full moon on December the 15th. I mean, I would find that really horrible. And I do think that there needs to be caution. And I've even done that with Donald Trump. I mean, I haven't actually said, I think he's going to be assassinated. But I did talk about, he's going to get knocked off his perch. And I mean,
yes,
we can use euphemisms in the sense, as long as we're not saying things, I think, that are hurtful, things that are contentious, things that are inflammatory. I think you have to be very careful. And I'm sure I've crossed that line a couple of times. But
I know I have. So I'm curious about how I feel about that. And I know a lot of my colleagues are using people's charts, and they're being published in magazines, and it's intimate information about somebody's psychology. And I'm just
thinking, it is.
And like you, how would I feel if somebody grabbed hold of my chart and splashed it all over?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like it. I mean, I have had people sort of do that stuff, and I have to, bite my lip and say, well, it's fair game.
Yes.
That is what I do.
It's not fair game if you're not an astrologer. I think but the trouble is, fame is such, and we're so obsessed with celebrity, and now astrology is so in the forerunning of where people go to first to find their information. And I'm just wondering whether you feel this could happen, that at some point there could be a celebrity that actually sues an astrologer.
I think that might be very true, but I just want to make another point. It's not just astrologers who make comments on famous people, leaders, whoever. And I think in a way we are right to examine a leader's chart, because, they should be up for criticism, as indeed a good journalist will criticize a leader or a celebrity. Psychologists are doing it. You can just go on YouTube now. There are about 120 psychologists talking about the state of Donald Trump's brain, and they're all qualified.
Yes. It's for me, I feel it's just a hodgepodge of stuff that isn't quite comfortable. And where do we go on the sort of the moral dilemmas about it, and being professional astrologers with all the knowledge that we have? And yes, you're absolutely right about how do we give comment about public figures, like, for instance, prime ministers or whoever, our MPs that aren't behaving very well or might not be behaving very well. How do we do that with integrity? And
Well, I think it's not. I mean, I think you could say that maybe there should be some guidelines drawn up, but you've got to remember, not everybody is going to be a member of a professional organization. I mean, it's there's a word I'm looking for. It is kind of chaos out there on YouTube. It's just me, and I don't think you'd ever be able to pull everybody in line to say, look, be careful what you say, how you say it. These are real people. And, you need to be talking about them in a way that if they were talking about you, you would believe it's fair game, even if you didn't like what they said, the way it's said and how it's put. It is a matter of personal integrity. And I do think you'd find most serious astrologers, most astrologers with any kind of reputation, really aren't going to be saying or writing very, very dangerous stuff. I don't think so.
No, and what so I find so interesting about you, you've had it on both levels. You've had people saying things about you which weren't true. And then, you've been on, the other receiving end and looking at very famous people's charts and putting information out about them. So if anybody knows that, the both sides of the coin, you do about this.
Well, I do. And as I said, I do my level best when I have to examine a chart and it's going out there, and, a lot of people will look at what I've said or listen to what I've said. I do really, really try to say things in a way that it's palatable. You can get your point across. You can do the astrology justice without, scaring the horses.
I'm just going to watch this whole area with interest. That's where I am at the moment, because
and I think you could be right that somebody could take an astrologer to court, very possibly. But I notice now a lot of psychics, and I don't know whether a lot of astrologers are doing it, but they say in bold letters, this is entertainment only.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, I personally couldn't write that. I couldn't write, this is for entertainment only. But people are getting, and if you remember, we're under the Rogues and Vagrants Act or something. Astrology comes under some very ancient act. And so we could be prosecuted under the Rogues and Vagrants Act, I think.
Isn't that interesting? I'd be very curious how all of this unfolds, how astrology is unfolding, because it's absolutely in the forefront of the zeitgeist, isn't it? I mean, in my experience, everyone now, well, not everyone, but a lot of people that weren't in the past are turning to astrologers for their main line information. What is the truth?
Right. Well, I mean, this is such a hot topic, really, because I don't even know where to begin, really, because when I came into astrology in the 70s, it was like the Renaissance. This was the time, John Addy was still alive. We had Robert Hand working, Liz Green publishing first book Saturn. There was Howard Suspordus. Mm-hmm. And we would all meet up every week, and then we'd go off to the pub. And it was like it was a wonderful emergence of astrology at a new level, more psychologically based, very much into mythology, but also looking at the journeys we were all making with various planetary cycles. It was very, very, very exciting. But frankly, this isn't a renaissance, what's happening now, as far as I can see. This is just young people especially getting hold of astrology and saying, oh, let's run with this ball. And getting all sorts of ridiculous ideas and spouting off. You know, there are 23-year-olds with 145,000 followers on YouTube speaking utter nonsense. So I'm not sure whether there's great growth in astrology. I mean, I'm hoping it's going to spawn some really wonderful young astrologers, and maybe there'll be yet another unfolding of the knowledge, which might take us beyond psychology into something a little bit more rarefied in terms of how is all of this working and why are we able to interpret and resonate. I think there are some exciting developments to come. But right now, I think it's just a free-for-all, you know.
It does concern me hugely that, I mean, and that's not knocking young people, because there's some very, very wise, well-educated and knowledgeable young people
Sure.
who are very drawn and called to astrology, and that's what they want to do with their world. And I think that's absolutely wonderful. I think Amanda Walsh from the Astrology Hub is doing a huge to support that, and I absolutely love what she's doing. And as you say, that it's the explosion of well, particularly on YouTube, and being influencers, and the shorts that are very popular now as well. I am concerned about people dishing out advice without any foundation or knowledge behind it.
Yes, it's terribly concerning. And I think regulations are going to come.
I hope so, because otherwise astrology is going to start slipping down the.
Well, I think we're very near that point where, you know, there will be considerations about not allowing astrologers to even discuss or video, their weeklies or whatever, you may choose, however you may choose to use that medium, because it's a very popular medium. And I would think that might be a dreadful thing. I think they're going to crack a nut with a sledgehammer. I think in order to somehow regulate it, the whole thing will.
Who do you think they is?
Who do
you're saying they're going to regulate it? Who do you think they are?
Well, whether it's pressure from governments to Elon Musk or Facebook or YouTube, I think it's that route. There's governmental pressure to bring in changes. I mean, we're already the whole thing with the, with the bullying and with the trolling, and especially of young people. And they're trying to bring in a lot of regulations there in order to protect people. Yes. So in an effort to protect the public, the government will come along with a sledgehammer and crack a nut. I mean, I think that's almost inevitable. So, I mean, in a sense, astrology being so open on the media, I think we're seeing its last days. I don't know how much longer it'll be there, tell you the truth.
Gosh, that's an interesting thing you're saying there, Penny. I hadn't thought of it like that, and actually now I see what you're. It is open season, isn't it?
Open season, that's the word I was looking for. Yeah, it is. And there will have to be regulations.
And I think that actually is going to be a really good thing, because it'll encourage people to actually train with a recognised school. And there's plenty of really good schools out there that have accreditation or can support people. And it would be so tragic for astrology to be cast aside again as some nutty evil doing thing, when it's not, because in both our experiences, I mean, astrology helps people hugely to understand who they are.
Yeah, and guides them through very, very difficult times.
Yes, exactly.
You can literally change someone's life by the advice you give them.
Absolutely, and understanding who they are and why they're here, and being able to support them. And what I was interested in was what I loved about what you're saying on your website is that the chart is the life path which can't be changed. Well, of course it can't, because it's a snapshot at the moment of your birth, but the fact it is your map and your guide. And do you want to say something more about that?
Well, yes, I was probably going off at a tangent again, so you'll have to stop me if I've gone off. But I have quite a big thing about this business of relocation, that people think, if I move to San Francisco, everything will change. I'll have Jupiter on my IC, this will happen. And I'm thinking, no, no, your birth chart is your birth chart is your birth chart. That's your map. However, if you move to San Francisco and we have a look at the chart of San Francisco and we see that San Francisco Saturn is on your sun, that may be quite a difficult experience for you. You're going to have to struggle in San Francisco. So I am definitely very clear on the birth chart being that very special moment, and you take it with you all your life. I mean, the seed pattern from there by progression is you're becoming a sunflower, not a daffodil,
Yes.
according to your seed pattern. And the transits, if you like, are also part of that whole story, the narrative of your life. All these ways of looking at how things have moved forward are, but it's always back to basics. I mean, if you are born with a Mercury-Uranus conjunction, you're always going to have that sense of, I see this differently, or, oh, guess what? I hearing voices. I mean, that Mercury-Uranus, I can take a flying leap somewhere. That's always going to be yours. That's your Mercury.
I think that's really interesting because I think well, in my own healing journey, before I really started my healing journey, I used to think, oh, I'll just go away somewhere, and I forgot that I had to take myself with me.
Yeah, you do, and you chart with you,
and your chart.
Bypass your transits. All your progressions, they're going with you all your life.
Yes.
So, yes, there is no get out of jail free card.
There is none, is there? But the synchronicities that happen that guide you into going, let's say I'm going to go and live in America, no idea why, but you end up living in a place where you've got your Venus line running through, and suddenly you're of your life. And I find that fascinating, this whole concept of how synchronicity is, for me, is the conduit, if you like. How do you see synchronicity and where it fits in?
Well, yes, synchronicity is terribly important. I mean, quite recently, synchronicity played an enormous part in my life, in that I had made a decision early on that I was such a purist or a dinosaur that I wasn't going to get involved in the asteroids or indeed anything that wasn't part of our solar system. I mean, yes, I read about Haumea, I read about, Aries, I've read about them all. Did I want to plant them in a chart and start taking them into consideration? No, I did not. But then I think I had been working for a while on something, and Chiron kept coming up, and I thought, I really need to sort of discuss Chiron, even if it is in a very objective way, even if I put a disclaimer on that saying, I personally don't use Chiron, but this is what, blah, blah, blah. And so I think I heard Melanie Reinhardt talking about Chiron, and I thought, oh, that makes sense. I like that. That is enormously interesting. So it was a series of things. And then finally, on the one day, I can't remember what the synchronistic incident was, but I thought, that's it. I have to use Chiron now. I absolutely know. And it was on the second Saturn-Uranus square. And I thought, well, it's a Saturn-Uranus object, comes in, Chiron comes in via Saturn, goes out via Uranus. I can no longer not include Chiron. So it was very late to start using Chiron as part of the astrological journey. But nonetheless, it came to me, it was like the cosmic gods were saying, for goodness sake, Penny, use this. You stop deliberately trying to avoid Chiron. What is it about Chiron you don't want to acknowledge?
Did it answer you?
Well, I started to use it. I mean, so I use it in all my charts now.
Yeah.
Right. And for the first year, this year, when I do my big year ahead, Chiron is going to be a very important part of that. And
go on.
Yeah, and one of the things that I feel about Chiron is, and I like the way it's the journey to healing, so to speak. But my particular belief about this is that it's not about finding healing. It's not about healing your wound. It's about managing your wound. It's about managing it. It's about accepting it, learning how to live with it, and to turn it into something that is of value. Mm-hmm. And that's rather different from, the whole idea that we have about awakenings and really understanding patterns, and that we think, oh, yeah, well, I've got the measure of this now. I've got this pattern. I've got a pattern of abandonment. Therefore, I won't keep picking partners who, are bad for me because I realize I have abandonment problems. And then, you think you've fixed it. You probably haven't, but you might think you've fixed it. With Chiron, most definitely, you've never fixed it. But by accepting and saying, look, I can live with this. And the analogy that I often use for Chiron is that when I did my sort of training in psychotherapy and hypnotherapy, I had an absolutely wonderful tutor. And he used to say that there is such a thing with pain, that there is the pain itself, and we're talking about physical pain, like a headache or whatever it is. But he said, in chronic pain, there is both the build-up of what it's been like, the history of the pain, there's the pain itself, and there's the expectation of the pain to come. And that experience of all those three makes the pain almost unlivable with. Whereas if you treat the pain in the moment of the pain and think not about the past or not about the future, but you deal with it and manage it, learn how to manage your pain, the pain will be livable with. And I think there's something aligned to Chiron about that same.
Oh, absolutely. And for me, Chiron, just reminds us to be humble. It brings us down to this level, death sort of squares us all off, doesn't it? And so does pain. And I think when we acknowledge that we're fatally flawed like everyone else, and that we're carrying a pain like everyone else, suddenly we just join the human race and we become...
Yes, everybody has a wound or wounds. Everybody. There isn't anybody who doesn't.
Now, Penny, I wanted to ask you, talking about pain, with the whole, the world's in a bit of a mess at the moment, isn't it? And I think a lot of us are experiencing a sense of pain and perhaps even despair. Now, I know there's quite a few astrologers talking about something called the ascension process, that we're going through this. This pain and what we're experiencing in the world is a process for us to sort of go into or evolve into a higher state of spiritual being. And I just wondered where you were with that.
Well, I mean, I've had no personal kind of enlightenment. I haven't had voices in my ear or someone appear in front of me to tell me that I am in the process of ascension. And I'm just part of humanity, the sheep and the goats. Some of us sheep are going up, and some of us goats are, earthbound. I don't really subscribe to that, because there is that kind of hint of, well, of course, if you're consciously aware, then you'll feel it. But sadly, if you're not, you're just stuck here. So I don't like that very principle. And I also think that it takes millions of years for humankind to evolve. I mean, when you think how long back we were from the Neanderthals, and millions upon years of development of consciousness, maybe there is an acceleration. Maybe we are going to learn how to access all those parts of our brain that don't appear to be used at all. And maybe there is a sense that each one of us individually, with the experiences that we're going through, may find that purification, for want of a better word, is going to lead to greater enlightenment. I can understand it that way. If we do it the other way around and talk about the ascension program or whatever it is, it's almost like this is coming down on you. This is heaven sent. This is the cosmic overlord saying, we have chosen you to have this particular consciousness upgrade. And there's something within me that so deeply rebels against that's the reason I don't embrace it as such. But I'm not ruling out the idea that humanity, individuals who make up the whole of humanity, going through their own personal crisis, whatever it may be, that there is a sense of having to grow in a way that we hadn't grown before. And if we use the idea of awareness, the more aware we are of what's going on and what we do, the more we see, the more choices we make. So I think it's sort of on that kind of scale.
And for me, it's about what we can put into the zeitgeist. That's the collective.
Sure.
And it's the more we understand who we are, the more we understand our psychological makeup. And as you say, work with the wound, the Chiron wound, then we contribute something more positive to the zeitgeist. And for the whole of humanity.
Yes,
split.
Growth for one person leads to growth of the whole. Yes. But there is something else that I've been sort of using a little bit more, is this idea of the collective consciousness. Not the collective unconscious, the collective consciousness. Because I believe these terrible things that are going on in the world, all the conflicts, all the absolute horror, the devastation, the things that we would never think could happen, on this massive scale. I feel that is in the consciousness. And, that is something that is playing and trickling down to all of us, that we feel that pain, we feel that loss, we feel that injustice, we feel all of this. And that's the way I'm sort of beginning to look at it now, the idea that we are bringing things into the consciousness. In the collective unconscious, the idea of sharing archetypes and things that are age old, themes and images and stories, that have been there since time immemorial. I'm looking at the collective consciousness as, in a way, a repository of all that's going on in the world, and that we all share it. We all have access to it. We're all affected by it.
Which would make sense that we carry the wound.
Yeah. Yes. Right.
We all, whether we're going to, inverted commas, ascend or not ascend, or whatever that means. So I'm not clear about that particularly either, and I'm not massively comfortable with it. But it is this, as you say, I think it's about taking self-responsibility, and that's what astrology can enable us to do by seeing.
Or it should do. It should do, because going back on your point about a lot of astrologers talking about, the ascension going on and all of this, it's almost as though in talking about astrology, whether it's client on client, whether it's in writing or in a book, or however you choose to spread this idea, podcast, YouTube, whatever, it's almost like a get out as well. It's like, okay, I can't explain, this, that, and the other, but don't worry, because we're all in the process of ascension and eventually it'll all be all right. Whereas I come from a different plane, and I think, look, these situations, we're on planet Earth for a reason. We're here because we have material problems. We have real life issues, and it's no good saying, okay, it'll all be all right. And I understand the spiritual process at work here. So I'm going to work on the spiritual all the time instead of thinking, look, there is a real problem here and I've got to step up and manage that problem. I've got to embrace it and deal with it. And I think by doing that, of course, when you achieve it, when you look at it, when you go through it, you handle it, you manage your circumstances, that in a way brings a kind of sense of peace, through having solved a very material matter or something that is bothering you on this earthbound plane. If you can find the answer or deal with the answer, then there is that next stage of feeling.
Yeah, I mean, we incarnated into a physical body. We're in a physical body in a physical world.
Yeah.
And I've always felt like that we're experiencing, for me, we're kind of passing through this world, having the human experience. I don't know where you are with this, but it feels like that but there is a reason why I've incarnated now. And there is a reason why I have been really called to do the work that I do, A, as a psychotherapist and B, as an astrologer, and this concept about encouraging or helping people to understand that the way forward is to take ultimate responsibility for ourselves, and within that, take ultimate responsibility for the collective. We're all in this together.
Yeah. And I just think that you can't escape your circumstances. Your circumstances are the ones which you have to face, and therefore you have to meet them and deal with them. And this is not quite the same, but it's another aspect of this whole idea of the expansion of consciousness, the sense that there is an uplift coming, there is all of this happening, that I have lived long enough and been an astrologer for long enough to have gone through several periods when there was some amazing astrological lineup, which was meant to be, this is it, this is the great transference, this is the great, time when there will be the separation of the sheep and the goats, and some of us are going to fly off into an ascended space and everyone else is going to be left behind, and people have gone off to remote parts of the world to experience this. Egypt, the Andes, everywhere. People have collected for this great moment in time when this surge of consciousness coming through will uplift us all. Well, I can go back 40 years. And I'm thinking, well, if that happened, why are we here now?
Yes. And why are we still struggling?
Yeah. So I think we have to keep things in perspective.
Yes. Yeah. I'm completely with you on this. I think for me, it is about keeping things in perspective. And, I absolutely believe that not the only way, but one of the ways is about personal responsibility and taking responsibility. You're incarnated in this body at this time. And we have to, it's a sense of coming together to bear witness about what's happening, because humanity is behaving very badly and we're all complicit, all of us.
Yes, but there have been eras before, and this is why I love history so much. If you go back and you look at various eras where there's been a lot of blood and plundering and terrible things going on, Inquisition, I mean, you name it. We can look back in history, and we don't have to look very far to go back to World War II with the Holocaust and all the other things that happened. And here we are again. We never learn. It's almost as though we never learn. And I don't really want to get into this situation, but, right now we are able to watch events unfolding through the amazing sources of, media that we have. We can be present in these terrible situations. We have feet on the ground there who are reporting and telling us what is going on. We didn't have that so much. Well, I wasn't around in World War II, but they certainly didn't have it in World War II. So in a way,
journalists there, they did have frontline journalists. They did.
Right, but then they had to write their copy and they had to telegraph.
Yes.
It isn't like something happens and straight away, Sky News are there with Emma telling you, reporting, from the scene. So we are very present in what's going on. And I know some people also advise, because it's so disturbing, not to get involved, not to look at it, not to let it blind you to the path. But no, we have to witness this. We have to see what is going on. We have to know what man is capable of. And I have to say that none of us know what we might do in a set of circumstances. And there, by the grace of God, we're not there.
Absolutely.
So making judgments is
totally agree. 100% agree with that.
Yeah, but we see at the moment really with both Ukraine and we see it in the Middle East as well. There's this constant diplomatic drive for peace, to get to a point where everyone can agree that they can't have everything they want. They can only have some things, but let's bring peace. Let's stop the killing. Let's have reasonability. And of course, all wars end in peace talks. All wars.
All wars.
All wars. So we will be at that point at some stage. But you can see these two opposite drives, can't you? You can see one force going forward to, battle for justice, rights, whatever it may be, and another side trying equally hard to settle things around a table. So we're observing it and seeing where it will get us. At some point, this will turn around. At some point. It
will, but we just don't know when.
No, and we're really in the thick of it now. You and I are talking in between eclipses. We had the lunar eclipse 10 days or so ago, and we've got the big solar eclipse coming up in a couple of days' time. And in this time space, we've seen things that we never thought we would see, really, in terms of the Middle East.
I think it's ever been thus, but what's so different is mass media, 24-hour news, immediate news. Everybody's a journalist, everyone, because they've got a mobile phone. They can just film it and pop it up on YouTube, and there you have, whether it's true or not true, you've got footage.
Oh yeah, and then that leads us into the whole fake news, disinformation, conspiracy theory, all of that, which is decimating countries, as we know,
and humanity. Actually, the behaviour of humanity. Penny, I'm just conscious of time. Is there something that you would like to say to the folk that are watching us right now about astrology and about what you perceive is unfolding for us all as a humanity?
Well, are you asking me to look at astrological cycles and make a comment?
Is there something that you would just like to share about what you know?
Okay, well, you've really landed me in this. I'm not sure whether I could come up really with anything profound. There's just so much I could say. We could look at it astrologically, really, from the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in 2020 and the onset of COVID, followed by the invasion. It was almost as though the clock started ticking as soon as that Saturn-Pluto conjunction occurred. And that was followed by Saturn into Aquarius, Jupiter into Aquarius, the Saturn-Uranus square, and now we're coming up to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So we are living in incredibly historical times. And I think it's important to remember that, this could be getting us into all sorts of, a quagmire here. But I do think the idea of free will and the ability to make choices is something we must hold on to.
Yeah.
Individually and collectively, that this story has not been written as to what will happen in Ukraine or in the Middle East or in Yemen or in America. The election is not being written. We are writing it as we go. And that's very important to remember.
Yes.
And as we look, we're going to look back on this decade, which started at 2020. And when we get to 2030, and we look back in these 10 years, I mean, everything will have changed. Everything. I mean, look at the space that artificial intelligence has been with us. It's so short a time, but the speed at which artificial intelligence is taking over everything, and all the sorts of things that we are trying to keep track with, this accelerated pace of change. Going to look back on it and see life as totally different, and we'll come back and think, well, this is the age of Aquarius. And I always felt that the age of Aquarius was really brought in with Pluto in Aquarius, Saturn in Aquarius, and Jupiter in Aquarius. It didn't have an exact date, but it was around that time. Again, we're looking at 2020, which might be an important embarkation point. But I want to come to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, because I think that's very, very interesting, because it's right in that very first degree of Aries. So this is not only a cardinal sign, but it is the first cardinal sign. Aries begins the zodiac. So you've got Saturn and Neptune, these two mighty planets in conjunction. Here we stand on the edge of something unknowable at this stage. We can't imagine what that means, because we're playing with two themes, aren't we? We're playing with the idea of Saturn making dreams real, bringing dreams into reality, but we're also looking at the shattering of dreams, the shattering of illusion. We're playing with those two themes in every walk of life. And if that particular conjunction connects with something in your chart, then you're going to feel that very personally, that message. But last thing I want to say about the Saturn-Neptune conjunction, and obviously I'm going to be writing about it and talking about it quite a lot more, but it is very, very significant in Russia. For Russia's history, Saturn and Neptune their conjunctions have played a very big part in their evolution, from the Communist Manifesto on the Saturn-Uranus conjunction, I think might have been Leo, and then going forward, you know, the assassination of Tsar Nicholas, and the arrival of communism, Saturn and Neptune. And we go forward a bit further, you know, the next cycle of Saturn and Neptune in Capricorn, the Soviet Union collapses, the Berlin Wall comes down. So everything changes with Russia. And the Saturn-Neptune conjunction of next year and into 2026, it's exact, I think, in February 2026, that Russia is going to become, there's a new regime coming in Russia. I can't tell you what that regime will be like, or necessarily, well, it will have to come about because Putin is no longer in charge. But quite what replaces, it's really been an autocracy, hasn't it, since the Soviet Union collapsed. It might have been looking as though it was going towards democracy, but by the time we got to the new millennia, all that had, you know, gone. Russia was diminished in Putin's eyes, which is why, since he's been there, it's been his goal really to make Russia great again. So we're going to see something pretty dramatic happening in these next 12 to 18 months in regard to Russia regime change. And once that changes, then a lot of other things change in the world too.
Like a pack of cards, won't it?
Yes, I think so. And yes, so that was something I wanted to say. I think if you're asking for astrological expertise.
That was perfect. Penny, thank you so much. This has given me lots of food for thought, and I'm sure everybody watching this will feel the same. And I'm just to let you know, I'm putting Penny's contact details underneath this video, so please do. That's where you can find Penny, through her website and through your wonderful Friday Bites.
Listen, there was one more thing I wanted to pick up on, which I think addresses one of the first questions you asked me about ethics.
Okay.
And I, certainly in my own case with the ethical situation surrounding Princess Diana, I didn't break my ethical code. Princess Diana told Andrew Morton and a whole lot of other people that I was her astrologer. And I was then responding to something. So if your client comes out and says, so and so and so and so was my astrologer, is my astrologer, then I think it's different. It's not like you suddenly decided, you know what, I'm going to, blab about this client of mine. It certainly wasn't like that. But yes, I mean, I think ethically, unless your client would like you to talk about your role in his or her life, then you would be breaking an ethical, you'd be overstepping that mark.
I think that's a perfect place to end. Penny, thank you so much. I'm so grateful. And and we'll be seeing each other
I was thinking that, and that's really, yes, I'm very excited about this conference. I really am. I'm looking forward to, there's nothing like live contact.
Exactly. Nothing like it.
Yes.
Penny, well, for now, thanks so much and see you soon.